Welcome to today's webinar on the art of teaching yoga. My name is Wenlin. It's a huge pleasure to be here with you. Just give me a couple moments while I check that the audio is streaming and everyone is able to hear and see me. Okay, so this is streaming live, and if you're tuning in live, please do let me know. Give me a moment to set up. Okay. All right, so for today's episode, actually, we will about queuing, and the month of March is on queuing. And for those of you who are new to the group, welcome to the Inspired Yoga Team, which is originally called the Art of Teaching Yoga. And this group was created to support you to teach yoga with confidence and also to leave lasting impact on your students. If you're new, welcome, and if we've not met before, my name is Wenlin. It's a huge pleasure to be here. I'm originally from Singapore, but now I'm based in Torino, Italy, and I've been teaching for 6 years now. I've been studying yoga and movement since I was very young. I started off as a dancer, and then I explored various other movement modalities, and then eventually I found yoga. So that's what I do for full-time living now. Okay, so less about me and more about today and about this month, what you can expect from this month. So I know that many of you have questions with regards to queuing and also with regards to sequencing, and this is also very closely tied with anatomy. So if you've seen the image from the main page, for the entire month of March, we will be exploring, the next couple of episodes, we'll be exploring queuing and how the language can be very, very important in supporting you to empower your students and supporting you as a teacher in refining and honing your craft and how you facilitate the yoga classes that you teach. All right, so if you're tuning in live, please leave a comment in the comment box so I know that you're tuning in. It would be great to hear where you're tuning in from. And also, before we begin, if you have any questions on what you're hoping to get from today's training. So most of the webinars that I conduct, the master classes I conduct, are really more of like Q&A. I'm here to answer your questions. If you have any questions with regards to specific areas, and there is some content that I've already prepared today, and this will be focused on the idea of comparing instruction versus guidance, and also I'll give you 3 practical tips on how you can begin to move away from the model of instruction towards the model of guidance and supporting your students to make them feel empowered and to teach more inclusive classes. All right. Okay, so I'm just checking in to see if anyone have any comments, and if you're tuning in, please do let me know. So I'll be checking in from time to time. So for those of you who've joined the Art of Teaching Yoga webinars last year, this will be a little bit similar to what we covered. So here I want to talk first about the 2 main approaches to teaching yoga. Before we even talk about the technique, even if we talk about the style, whether it's Ashtanga or Yin or Anusara or Kids Yoga, let's talk about just the approach to guiding your students through yoga. So from how I see it, there are 2 ways that I've seen instructors begin to guide their students. The first is through instruction. So I am instructing you. And with regards to instruction, this is very clear. There's usually a fixed direction. And teachers who are focused on instruction, for example, you might see core power yoga instructors, they have very fixed kinds of cues. The instructors cannot deviate from the set kind of text, from the kind of verbs, from the kind of language that they've used. If you've been to Bikram style yoga, so not the hot yoga, but the original 90-minute hot yoga by Bikram, that's also very similar. There's very clear set fix of even choreographed words or phrases that all the instructors have to say word for word. And it's almost like you memorize the choreography and then you teach your students, and the students also follow like word for word, and they follow step by step. So it's a lot about order. And also it's a lot about control, because a yoga instructor cares a lot about whether or not he or she has control over the students in the class, over, for example, how the class is unfolding. So this is the first approach. And I want to invite you to begin to reflect on how later on, as I continue to talk about today's webinar and about the cues, right, how this might reflect in your own teaching. And the second approach, right, is with regards to guidance. So my own teacher has a very different approach, and I've studied with various other teachers, and my own style of teaching is a little bit less orthodox, I would say. I don't consider myself to follow a specific lineage. I've studied with many different teachers across different lineages, and that's why I take a more broad perspective, taking bits and pieces from here, from Anusara, from Hatha, from somatics, from Qigong, from Tai Chi, and this is reflecting in how I begin to hold space for my students. So with regards to guidance, how I see it is, I am guiding you on a journey. So every single class is almost like a journey that you guide your students through. So there's almost like a destination. Maybe you create a path or you create an itinerary for your students, and you want to take them to this scenery, or maybe you want to guide them to feel this specific part of themselves, this specific part of their body, or maybe you would like to guide them to feel this specific part of their mind or their heart or soul, depending on what resonates with you, of course. Right? And with regards to this approach, it is less about control. It is less about direction, and it's a lot about holding support, offering support, not as someone in a more authoritative position who is higher than the student and necessarily, for example, instructing the student. Instead, you are someone who perhaps knows a little bit more than the student in this area, and you are there to offer support as and when the student needs. You are there to offer the student guidance so that they know what the blueprint, for example, of this movement is. But once they understand the blueprint and they figure it out, how it feels in their body, then they have the freedom to explore and express themselves and to really be creative, to really be inside their bodies and also inside their minds and their hearts. So this is the second approach. And so this is what I see in most of, and from my understanding, from my experiences, for example, taking classes with Anusara yoga teachers, I tend to see that Anusara has a style that's a little bit more lyrical, it's a little bit more poetic, it's more towards the style of guidance as compared to instruction. But of course, this is all very subjective. So now, before we go on and talk about the rest of today's episode, I'd like to invite you to think about your own approach and your own experience as a student. What styles and lineages have you studied? And also with regards to the cueing, what language has your teachers or have your teachers used with you? And also you as a teacher as well, many of you within this group, you are teachers or teachers in training. What language comes most naturally to you when you guide your students? Do you tend to have a fixed idea of what the class should be like and how it should unfold? Do you prefer when you have more control and more authority over the class, over your students, and do you like it when they always listen to you? Does it infuriate you if halfway through the class, for example, you see a student doing something totally different from what you are inviting the class to do? So this is what I invite you to reflect on just for a couple of moments, just to think about this. And then you can also use this time just to write down whatever comes to mind. And next, I want to talk a little bit about why I am all for advocating guidance over instruction. And I know this is very misleading because, for example, many studios, if you teach at a yoga studio, if you teach at a gym, or even, for example, if you teach at a community center often, the term that they use to refer to you is yoga instructor because you instruct the students, right? Or, for example, yoga teacher. So teacher also has a different connotation, and in the 5-day challenge, that happened in, I think, February. Like we discussed this with a couple of students. Sean, I'm not sure if you're here. Sean gave a couple of different other words. So some people like to see themselves not as a teacher, but as a coach. So coach is someone who's more, who encourages the person who's being mentored. Like, for example, a sports coach. Right? We see athletic sports people, for example, tennis players, runners, they have this very close connection with the coach, and the coach to them is a very special person. Instead, for example, an instructor might be someone whom you really respect, but not necessarily have that intimate connection with. So this is the other thing I want to invite you to think about. What kind of relationship would you like to foster with your students? Are you someone who is more personal and would prefer to hold a clearer boundary between yourself and your students, or are you someone who doesn't necessarily see it as, oh, we have a very clear teacher-student relationship, or even client, this is my client, and then I am the yoga teacher who's being hired by this client. So I want to invite you to think about that. And this is very, very personal, and there's no right or wrong here. What matters is that it works for you and that it works for your student. And also knowing that this might change according to the setting under which you teach. For example, when I teach a group class, usually I would address them by name, but if someone asks me about this group of people I'm teaching, I usually refer to them as students, and then I'm the teacher. But then in a private setting, usually on one-on-one, when I do one-on-ones, I usually call that a client. That's just something that feels or resonates better with me. And sometimes it might be a small difference, but it might change how you see the relationship, and it might change also how you approach the relationship and the language that you use when you speak to your client, and the kind of, for example, whether you keep a distance, whether you ask more personal things, whether you allow your students also to become closer to you, not just as a teacher and a student, but also as a person, possibly even a friend. So this is something for you to think about. And so going back to the point of today's episode, I really want to empower you to think about the idea of shifting away from instruction towards guidance. Because, and I know, for example, this will differ according to the lineage that you've trained under. Many of you, for example, might be teaching Ashtanga, you might be teaching core power yoga, and these styles of yoga naturally, due to the nature and the sequencing and, for example, the essence of what it is trying to convey, and the history behind these lineages, behind the people who created these styles of yoga, it may be more authoritative, it may be more about control. But know that you as a teacher, whatever style that you teach, at the end of the day, you have the liberty and the freedom to make it yours. So we are not here out there in this world, online world, in-person world, to teach a fixed sequence, completely parroting someone else. I truly believe that the art of teaching yoga here, that it is an art. This is why it's called the art of teaching yoga, because I think aside from being teachers, we are also artists. To some extent, when we facilitate the class, when you facilitate the class, there's a flair to it. There's a style. There's your own approach. And this is what draws your students to you. There might be 20,000 Ashtanga teachers or 20,000 Vinyasa flow teachers or Yin Yoga teachers out there. But what makes it special is the way you facilitate the class. Okay, so going back to the point, and I digress a little bit, I'm just going to check if anyone has any questions or comments in the chat. But then with regards to this, when we shift away from instruction to guidance, and later on I'll elaborate on how you can do that, it allows your students more freedom to express themselves. It allows them to feel acknowledged as individual human beings with room for variation, and we know there's a lot of variation from human to human. If you study a little bit of anatomy, you'll know there's skeletal variation, so there are many different poses that, for example, some of us might not be able to do because of how we've been structured skeletally. And this has nothing to do with, for example, how many years we've been practicing, even though that does help. So I really want to encourage you, because I think right now more than ever in this time and age, when we look at social media, when we interact, and I have many friends who are, for example, they have an impression of what yoga is like by following Instagram, by watching people on Facebook or even on TikTok, and they have this impression that yoga is doing contortionist-like poses, or getting your legs over your head. And I'm like, I really truly believe that most of you, perhaps in this group, also believe that this is not what yoga is about. Maybe asana, yes, it is indeed important, but it's only one of the 8 limbs of yoga. We are here to guide the students, guide our clients, or however you see them, these people whom we are fortunate enough to encounter, to return to the realization that they are whole. This is the message of yoga, yoga as union, to yoke, to return to that sense of completeness, and to realize that everything you need is already there. So how can we facilitate this? And how can we, for example, in this time and age, for example, when students attend a class, especially for beginners, if you're working with beginners, many of them will feel intimidated when they join a class and they see, for example, you being able to do a specific pose. Maybe you're really great at handstands and you want to teach a handstand class. Maybe you really love sweaty, strong core yoga, and you happen to be teaching a group of mothers who are, let's say, not so strong, not so persistent with regards to the physical aspect of yoga. How can you begin to still incorporate elements of yoga that you love, but then at the same time allow a little bit of freedom to empower these students to be who they want to be and to make that experience their own? So this is what I would elaborate on for the next part of today's episode. And there are 3 main tips I want to share with you. Right. The first one that you can do is to start to shift away from instruction towards invitation, and to shift away from execution to experimentation. So when you attend a yoga class, I'm not sure if any of you have had that experience as a beginner student to yoga when you attend a yoga class, or maybe you are at an ashram or yoga studio and you enter the class, and halfway through the class, there are people on the mat right next to you doing all these difficult transitions, like maybe they are coming effortlessly into headstand and you're like, what's going on? You know, I don't know how to do all these complex poses, and you feel intimidated, and because you feel like you didn't manage to do the full variation of the pose, and you didn't manage to, you know, go into all these complex things that the instructor is guiding you into. So the first thing you can do when you cue is to say, when you're offering something that you think might be a little bit more complex, you can say, I invite you to try this. Or, for example, feel free to experiment with this variation or this option. So this gives your students the freedom, and they know that, oh, it's an experimentation. I can try if I feel comfortable, if I want to, and it is also more about experimenting. When you experiment, you fail, right? Scientists experiment a lot of times before they actually find the solution to whatever it is that they're looking for. Maybe they finally find the molecule for the vaccine that they've been searching for. But the key here is really like not so much about nailing the pose or about nailing that transition, like the jump through or the jump back, but instead to practice and to observe how we are feeling and to experiment. What happens if I try drawing my belly in as I jump back? What happens if I try tipping maybe my pelvis, lifting it up a little bit more and then transferring the weight towards my palms in Bakasana, for example? So these are ways that you can begin to cue, to guide your students to shift away from instruction to invitation. So you're inviting them. It's never compulsory to join the party. And also, it's more about experimenting, not about how well they do the pose. That's not the point of the class. Okay, the second point I want to share with you that might be helpful is probably you're already doing this, comfort. Comfort always comes first. And whatever it is, wherever your students are, I think it's really very important, it's of paramount importance that we as teachers, at the end of the day, whether you're a teacher, whether you're a coach, whether you're an instructor, who are we without the people that we serve? And we are here to serve. There's a note right in front of my desk that says, stay in service. And this is something that I try to remind myself to stay humble and always remind myself I'm here to support others, to share the teachings of the teachers that have taught me. And by sharing these, I remember as a student myself what it was like and what it is still like. So when we return to this state of like understanding your students and meeting them where they are, we understand that it's important to make themselves feel comfortable. So, for example, one thing that I've noticed in the beginning of classes is often many teachers will invite students to close their eyes at the beginning of the practice. Maybe you are in a seated position and you might say, please close your eyes, and then we will start with this pranayama or something. For many students, this is not comfortable. So there's a chance that for any reason, your student might be a survivor of a sexual assault, or might have experienced some other kind of trauma, or might have experienced anxiety attacks. For people like this, closing their eyes is very traumatic. So, for example, always offer an option. So, for example, if you feel comfortable, feel free to close your eyes. And one thing that I've heard from other teachers that I really love is, if you prefer to keep your eyes open, let your eyes rest on a point that is not moving, holding a soft, gentle gaze. So this already sets the tone for the beginning of the class. So you give options and you let people know that, okay, I can choose what I want, and that's okay, and there are many different options. And even though it's a journey, it's a path, I can choose how I want to go on this journey. Maybe a little bit faster, maybe I take a detour here, maybe I go down this side lane instead of this main lane that everyone is taking. And it doesn't matter. What matters is your own journey and you walk your own path. Yeah, and another thing that relating to comfort is also, for example, if you're teaching meditation or even if you're teaching yoga, you can always feel free to add on and say, feel free to back out from a posture or to lie down in Shavasana any point of time or return to child's pose. For example, when I teach in studios, very often, if there are people who are first time to the class, before I do anything, I introduce myself, I ask if anyone is new, and then I demonstrate child's pose. I tell them this is always an option. If anything gets too intense, always come back to this pose. This is your base, home base, and you can always return back home and feel safe and welcome here. So you always offer them that option. And sometimes even during class, if you really want to empower your students to take that home base, then demonstrate it yourself. Show yourself, like if you are modeling the class online or in person, come into child's pose yourself, even if you're not tired. But you notice and you observe some of the students seem really tired, then come into child's pose because they will follow you. At the end of the day, you are the guide, you are the instructor, they are looking to you for guidance. And with regards to students, sometimes they want to push themselves. And I know probably you might experience this, and I've been there before as well. Even when I'm super tired, I'm like, no, the instructor is doing this very difficult variation, and I want to do it as well because I think I can do it. And I want to push myself a little bit more. But sometimes I might not know myself so well. So the skills of observation as a teacher are very, very important as well. And when you plan a sequence, have the sequence in mind, but be flexible. And this comes back to sequencing, and you can have a look at some of the other master classes on sequencing, and I'll offer you some tips on that. Have backup plans and have options that are not, for example, the peak pose or something more extreme. Have track 1, track 2, track 3. So Bernie Clark likes to say there's track 1, there's track 2, track 3, or option A, option B, option C. So people know that it's free for them to choose whatever option best resonates to them. And also one thing I would recommend as an instructor, right, even though you might be tempted to and you might want to demonstrate all options, I highly recommend, especially if you're teaching an all levels class and you observe that most of the students or even one student. This is my belief genuinely as teachers, that we should follow the pace of the slower student or the majority students. So you should find a way to offer things that will challenge most people in the group, but people who are falling behind, we need to encourage them. We need to really make them feel empowered. And how do you do that? You show it by also being in the option 1, in track 1. So maybe, for example, today you're demonstrating Bird of Paradise. So we come into Warrior 2, right? And then maybe you come into extended side angle. Maybe you put your forearm on the thigh. Maybe that's option 1. Maybe option 2, you use a block and you place your palm on the block. Maybe option 3, you try to come into the bind. You experiment with the bind. If the bind doesn't happen, that's okay. And that's fine. And then whatever option they are in, that's great. And then for the last option, again, you can say, option to experiment. For those of you who have Bird of Paradise in your practice, feel free to come into it. And if you want, you can demonstrate that version as well if you do modeling, or you can choose to stay in the forearm variation in extended side angle. And that's perfect, especially if most of the people in the class are struggling with the other variation. So this is very, very important. Comfort first, and also just observing your students, meeting them where they are today. Good. And the last point I want to share about, I already touched a little bit about this, is a little bit about self-expression, about creativity, and about the options, about variations, about props. So sometimes, for example, what I find interesting, because I offer variations with hands and stuff like that, and it's more flowing postures because I integrate Qigong. Sometimes what I like to do is we're in a stagnant posture and instead we're moving towards something flowing with the palms. I would say find your own expression and let this be an expression of your feeling and your sensation from within. And same thing, for example, if you're teaching Wild Thing and people are opening and shining their heart, let them really express how they feel from the heart, from the soul. If this language resonates with you, then feel free to use it. And if this doesn't resonate with you, that's okay. Drop it and let it go. So what works for you at the end of the day? And the last thing is, of course, with regards to options and props. I already mentioned that I highly recommend, if possible, especially for variations that are a little bit more difficult, for poses that can be considered more challenging. Always offer variations, offer options with props, offer options with props that people might have at home. Very important. A lot of your students might not have yoga blocks. What do? Tell them to prepare a book. A book is just fine. It's the same as a block. If they don't have a yoga block, what else could they use? They could use carta igienica. That's the Italian name for toilet rolls. And I've used them perfectly before in the yin class when you're using them to come into supported fish pose. So 2 rolls of toilet roll behind your head, 2 behind your back, side by side, and it works perfectly fine. So being a little bit creative with regards to how you facilitate the classes, how you offer props, how you offer variations is also super important. And also with regards to your language as well, it's very, very important. For example, you can say you have the option to stay in this pose or try this variation or try this. And when you say try, it then becomes something for people to experiment with instead of this sensation or this feeling like, I definitely have to do it and I cannot seem to do it. And also just throughout the practice, using words and phrases that reinforce and remind your students to listen to their bodies and honor their bodies where their own body as it is today. Because every day the practice will be different. So know that, for example, wherever you are in your practice today is perfect. And where you are right now is great. So it's more about the journey, less about the destination. And also, for example, another phrase you could do is try these 2 options, try this first, and then try that first, and choose what feels good for you today. So one thing I like to do is, for example, when I get my students to point and flex the toes, I would get them to experiment. So what's happening here? Can you feel what's happening? Can you feel that when you pull your toes towards your face, you're lengthening the muscles. You might feel this sensation along the back of your thighs, your calves, right? And you're pushing through the ball of your feet. Instead, when you point your toes, what's happening is all the muscles and the connective tissue along the top of your leg, along the top of your feet, instead are lengthening, and along the back, the posterior chain, they're contracting. So the opposite movement is happening. So when you use language like this and you invite your students to feel themselves, to experiment, to understand, this is how it feels. I didn't know I could choose this or that, then it gives them more freedom and it makes them feel validated, and it gives them also the idea that yoga is not necessarily a fixed path or destination, and really truly yoga could be for everyone, including them, however they are, maybe with injuries, maybe not feeling so great today, maybe they've experienced trauma, whatever that is. Okay, and with that, I think I've come to the end of today's masterclass. I'm going to have a quick look to see if anyone has any questions or comments. I've seen a few of you are tuning in live. Please let me know in the last couple of moments. I still have about 1 more minute. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them in the chat. I would love to hear from you. And then sometimes also, for example, even though I go live and I check in the chat, but I don't seem to see your comments until after the call ends. Okay, I don't seem to see any questions or comments. Well, in any case, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them in today's episode. This episode will still be in the group after the live airs. It will be inside the section which is the guides as a masterclass, and you can watch the replay anytime. I hope you have a great week ahead. Please take care, and I'll see you next week on another episode for queuing. You can check that out in the main page. I'll just have a quick look to share. All right, take care, have a great week ahead, and see you soon.